Professor Ramesh Kapoor, a 67-year-old Indian literature scholar, and Emily Thompson, a bright 25-year-old Canadian student, seemed worlds apart, yet their paths collided in a way no one on campus could have predicted. What began as admiration and mentorship quickly spiraled into a secret, dangerous obsession that would consume them both. Late-night library meetings, private messages, and stolen moments behind closed doors hid a dark, forbidden connection, one that escalated beyond control. When obsession turned to rage, the quiet university halls became the scene of a shocking murder that stunned an entire academic community, leaving a trail of fear, heartbreak, and unanswered questions. The trial of Professor Kapoor gripped the campus and the nation, exposing the full extent of his obsession and the calculated nature of Emily's murder. Courtroom proceedings revealed a detailed picture of how a seemingly respected academic had manipulated, controlled, and ultimately destroyed the life of a young student. Testimonies from colleagues, former students, and experts in psychology painted a chilling portrait of Kapoor's descent into possessive obsession. The evidence showed that the murder was not a sudden act of passion, but the inevitable result of months of manipulation, control, and psychological pressure. Emily's family attended every day of the trial, their grief palpable. Friends and students watched as the details unfolded, struggling to reconcile the image of the brilliant, authoritative professor with that of a man capable of such violence. The court proceedings were emotional and tense, highlighting not only the crime itself, but also the warning signs that had been ignored or overlooked. Each revelation deepened the shock and anger of those who had trusted Kapoor, and the campus community began the difficult process of reckoning with the truth. When Kapoor was finally sentenced to life imprisonment, there was a mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but it could not undo the loss of Emily's vibrant life or erase the trauma left behind. The university implemented new safety protocols, counseling services, and stricter guidelines for faculty-student interactions, determined that such a tragedy would never happen again. Emily's memory became a symbol, a reminder of how obsession, secrecy, and unchecked power can escalate into tragedy when left unaddressed. The campus slowly returned to its routines, but the shadow of the events lingered. Lecture halls, libraries, and dormitories were forever marked by the knowledge of what had occurred within their walls. The story of Professor Kapoor and Emily Thompson became a cautionary tale. The arrest of Professor Kapoor sent shockwaves through the campus and beyond. By the time the police moved in, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, forensic findings, and digital communications all pointed directly to his involvement in Emily's murder. Yet when authorities entered his office, he appeared unervingly calm, his composed demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. There was a chilling precision in the way he interacted with investigators, answering questions with measured words, showing no outward sign of remorse. The calmness only intensified the horror for those who had once admired him, leaving them struggling to reconcile the respected scholar with the murderer he had become. Media coverage exploded, capturing the attention of a global audience. Headlines detailed the shocking affair, the obsession, and the violent culmination of a secret that had simmered for months. Students and faculty were left reeling, grappling with the reality that someone they had trusted and respected could commit such a heinous act. The university, which had prided itself on safety and academic integrity, suddenly became the backdrop for a story of betrayal, manipulation, and fatal obsession. As the investigation progressed, Kapoor's past behaviors and patterns came under scrutiny. Former students and colleagues recounted subtle signs of control, manipulation, and inappropriate relationships that had previously gone unnoticed or unreported. The depth of his obsession with Emily and the steps he had taken to isolate and dominate her revealed a chilling premeditation that shocked even seasoned detectives. Emily's family and friends, devastated by the senseless loss, struggled to understand how a young life filled with promise could end so abruptly. Kapoor's arrest marked the first step toward justice, but it also raised difficult questions about accountability, trust, and the hidden dangers that can lurk behind respected. The morning after Emily's disappearance, the campus was filled with confusion and unease. Students whispered anxiously in hallways, worried about the sudden absence of someone they had seen every day. Faculty members exchanged concerned glances, unsure whether it was a simple case of a missing student or something far more sinister. Authorities were quickly alerted, and the investigation began in earnest. Forensic teams swept the library and surrounding areas, meticulously searching for any clues that could explain Emily's disappearance. Every corner of the archives was examined, revealing subtle signs of struggle: a toppled chair, a misplaced book, and faint traces of blood that hinted at the violence that had occurred. Detective Ananya Singh, known for her precise and methodical approach, was assigned to the case. She began reconstructing the events leading up to Emily's disappearance, analyzing security footage, emails, and messages between the student and Professor Kapoor. Gradually, a disturbing picture emerged: a secret affair that had escalated into obsession, manipulation, and ultimately murder. Witnesses came forward, describing the increasing intensity of Kapoor's attention and the changes in Emily's behavior. The evidence pointed to a calculated plan, not a crime of passion, revealing the professor's controlling nature and the psychological pressure he had exerted over her. As investigators pieced together the timeline, the campus community was rocked by the realization that a trusted academic figure could be capable of such violence. The investigation uncovered not just the crime, but the depth of Kapoor's obsession, the private meetings, the constant surveillance, and the manipulative tactics he had employed to keep Emily close. Each discovery added layers of horror and disbelief. The university, once considered a sanctuary of learning and safety, now appeared vulnerable, a place where secrets could fester until they erupted into tragedy. One rainy evening, the tension that had been quietly building for months reached its breaking point. The campus was nearly empty, the sound of raindrops tapping against windows and puddles reflecting the dim glow of streetlights, adding an eerie backdrop. Professor Kapoor requested a private meeting with Emily in the library archives, a secluded part of the university few ever visited. She hesitated but felt compelled to go, partly out of obligation, partly out of fear of his reaction if she refused. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, charged with the intensity of their hidden connection and the underlying danger neither fully acknowledged. Inside the archives, the shelves created narrow, shadowed corridors. The storm outside mirrored the growing storm within Kapoor. His behavior, which had been increasingly controlling and obsessive, now erupted into a dangerous unpredictability. Emily sensed it immediately: the cold, rigid control in his movements, the sharpness in his gaze. Panic began to rise as she realized that the professor she had admired and trusted was no longer rational, that the line between affection and obsession had vanished entirely. In that confined space, the situation spiraled out of control. Kapoor's desperation to maintain control collided with Emily's growing fear. Her attempts to distance herself, to assert independence, only inflamed his possessiveness. In a moment of blinding rage and intense emotional turmoil, Kapoor acted with irreversible violence. The archives, once a place of knowledge and quiet study, became the scene of a shocking and tragic act. Emily's life was brutally taken in an instant. The campus, unaware of the events unfolding within its walls, would soon be rocked by the discovery of the crime. The murder left an invisible scar, shattering the sense of safety that students and faculty had long taken for granted. The quiet corridors and familiar classrooms that had once symbolized learning and growth became a haunting. Rumors began circulating quietly across the campus, small whispers that grew louder with each passing day. Emily's interactions with other students, once casual and friendly, were now scrutinized through the lens of Professor Kapoor's growing possessiveness. He watched every move, interpreting ordinary gestures as threats to his control. The intensity of his obsession escalated, and a shadow of paranoia settled over him. He began to believe that anyone who drew Emily's attention away from him could be a danger, a rival he could not tolerate. Emily herself started noticing the subtle changes in his behavior. At first, it was small things, a lingering stare, an unexpected question about her personal life, a suggestion to change her plans so she could spend more time under his supervision. Soon, the incidents became harder to ignore. Doors left unlocked in her dorm, a figure lingering in the shadows during late-night walks, and notes left in her books that contained cryptic warnings all contributed to a sense of unease. The campus that had once felt safe and familiar now seemed infiltrated by an invisible threat. Despite these signs, Emily struggled with conflicting emotions. She felt flattered by the attention and believed that Kapoor's guidance was indispensable for her future, but a gnawing fear began to creep in. The thrill of secrecy was turning into a source of stress, as the professor's behavior became increasingly controlling. His obsession manifested in ways that were difficult to predict. Possessive gestures, sudden anger over minor perceived slights, and calculated attempts to isolate her socially. The tension between them escalated to a breaking point. What had started as a forbidden attraction was now evolving into something far more dangerous. The quiet corridors and dimly lit classrooms of the university became a psychological battlefield where control, fear, and obsession collided. Beneath the surface of academic life, a storm was building, one that, as weeks turned into months, the nature of Professor Kapoor and Emily's relationship shifted from curiosity to obsession. What had begun as an academic connection had grown into something far more consuming. Kapoor's attention became intense, almost suffocating, and his admiration for Emily crossed into possessiveness. He monitored her academic performance obsessively, tracking her interactions with other students and even noting her activities outside the university. Every achievement of hers felt like a personal victory, every distraction a threat. Emily, at first flattered by the attention, began feeling the weight of it, though she convinced herself it was just part of the mentor-student dynamic. Emily's friends began noticing troubling changes. She became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours alone with the professor, neglecting her social life and other responsibilities. Her conversations hinted at anxiety and a constant preoccupation with Kapoor's opinions. There was excitement in being admired, but also fear of disappointing him. Even small mistakes in her work led to long, intense sessions of critique, leaving her exhausted but strangely compelled to stay close. The line between mentorship and control had vanished, replaced by a psychological tension neither could escape. Kapoor's obsession was not just intellectual. It was emotional and territorial. He began orchestrating situations to ensure Emily remained within his orbit, steering her projects, influencing her academic choices, and subtly isolating her from others who might compete for her attention. The campus, which had once felt like a safe and structured environment, became a place of quiet manipulation and hidden anxiety. While outwardly everything seemed normal, beneath the surface a dangerous dynamic was developing. Each day, the bond tightened, creating a psychological dependency that neither fully recognized. The stage was being set for a reckoning, a point of no return, as Kapoor's obsessio. Late nights at the university library became a familiar routine, a place where Professor Kapoor and Emily could meet without drawing attention. At first, their discussions were strictly academic, complex literature theories, research methodologies, and historical texts. But gradually, the boundaries between teacher and student began to blur. Their conversations grew longer, more personal, and increasingly secretive. Emails and messages, once limited to assignments and deadlines, started to carry a tone that no one else would have noticed, curious, intimate, and insistent. Emily began seeking out his guidance more often, sometimes under the pretext of research, sometimes just to be near him. The campus, bustling and lively during the day, held a different kind of tension in the evenings. Empty corridors and dimly lit corners became the backdrop for their clandestine interactions. Professor Kapoor, despite his age and experience, found himself drawn in by Emily's youth, intelligence, and charm. He began to bend the rules subtly, providing her with opportunities and access that other students could only dream of. Emily, equally captivated, was both excited and wary. There was a thrill in the secrecy, a dangerous allure in the hidden meetings and whispered exchanges. Outside observers might have seen nothing unusual, but a psychological tension had taken root. Emily's friends noticed subtle changes. She grew quieter, more withdrawn from her usual social circle, and preoccupied with her studies and meetings with the professor. Meanwhile, Kapoor's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began watching over her more closely, offering unsolicited advice on her personal choices, subtly guiding her actions. Their connection, initially forged in academic mentorship, was now evolving into something far more complicated and unbalanced. In the quiet corners of the library and the glow of computer screens, a bond was forming that neither fully understood. The university campus was alive with the energy of a new academic year. Students hurried between buildings, clutching notebooks and laptops, their conversations blending into a constant hum of excitement and anticipation. Among the crowd walked Professor Ramesh Kapoor, a 67-year-old scholar whose reputation preceded him. Known for his strict teaching style, meticulous research, and decades of dedication to literature, he commanded respect from both colleagues and students. His presence was quiet but undeniable, a figure who seemed untouchable in the hierarchy of academia. Life had always been predictable for him: lectures, research, and a solitary routine that he found comforting. But everything began to shift when Emily Thompson arrived. Emily, a 25-year-old Canadian student, was everything the campus was buzzing about. Intelligent, confident, and curious, she stood out effortlessly among her peers. Her background was different, her perspective fresh, and her ambition evident in every action. When she entered Professor Kapoor's classroom for the first time, something unspoken stirred within him. It was subtle at first, a fleeting recognition of her sharp mind and the way she challenged ideas with thoughtful questions. Her attention toward him, though polite and academic, carried a spark of fascination that he had not experienced in years. Their interactions started as simple exchanges about coursework and research projects. Professor Kapoor, initially unaware of the growing tension, found himself spending extra time reviewing her assignments, offering guidance that was more detailed and personal than he had ever given to any other student. Emily, in turn, seemed drawn to his wisdom, eagerly seeking his advice and presence. No one else noticed the quiet pull between them, and the rest of the campus remained oblivious. But in the shadows of lectures and library halls, a secret connection was forming, one that would slowly develop into something dangerous, setting